Hello everyone. Before we begin tonight's haunting tale, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the fear. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time the unknown feels closest to you. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the whispers of the unknown guide you through the eerie corridors of our story. Ready to face the darkness?
The small village of Ashford had long been a place of quiet charm, its cobblestone streets and ivy-clad cottages nestled in the rolling hills of the English countryside. But there was one house that cast a long shadow over the town, Ashford Manor. The sprawling estate loomed at the edge of the village, its silhouette a stark contrast to the idyllic surroundings. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices tinged with a mixture of awe and unease. For as long as anyone could remember, the manor had been shrouded in mystery, its secrets guarded by the ever-present sound of a clock that never seemed to stop ticking. The clock, housed in a grand tower that rose above the manor's slate roof, was both a marvel and an enigma. Its rhythmic chime echoed across the village every hour, even though no one had ever seen it wound or maintained. Generations of villagers swore that it had ticked without pause for centuries, its steady cadence a haunting reminder of time's inexorable march. Some claimed it was cursed, others believed it was enchanted, but all agreed on one thing: Ashford Manor and its clock were not to be disturbed. For Olivia Hartley, the manor was more than just a village curiosity, it was an obsession. A historian by trade and a skeptic by nature, Olivia had spent years researching the estate's history, piecing together fragments of its past from dusty records and faded letters. Yet, despite her efforts, much of the manor's story remained maddeningly elusive. The clock, in particular, defied explanation, its origins and mechanism a mystery even to the most diligent investigators. To Olivia, it was a puzzle begging to be solved, and she was determined to be the one to unravel its secrets. Her fascination with the manor began as a child, during summers spent visiting her grandparents in Ashford. While other children played in the fields and streams, Olivia would wander to the edge of the manor's sprawling grounds, her curiosity piqued by the imposing gates and the tantalizing glimpses of the house beyond. Her grandparents had warned her to stay away, their voices heavy with superstition. Ashford Manor is not a place for the living, her grandmother had said, her tone as grave as a funeral bell. But Olivia was not one to heed warnings, and the manor's allure only grew stronger with time. Now, years later, Olivia found herself standing at those same gates, her pulse quickening as she gazed up at the clock tower. The opportunity to explore the manor had come unexpectedly, in the form of a letter from the estate's new owner, a reclusive businessman named Alaric Shaw. He had read one of Olivia's articles about the history of Ashford and invited her to conduct a thorough study of the manor's archives. The offer was irresistible, and despite her friends' and colleagues' warnings, Olivia had accepted without hesitation. The gates creaked open as Olivia pushed them, the sound echoing through the still morning air. The path leading to the house was overgrown with weeds, the once pristine gardens now a tangle of wildflowers and brambles. The manor itself was both magnificent and foreboding, its weathered stone facade and ivy-covered walls bearing the marks of centuries gone by. The windows, dark and reflective, seemed to watch her as she approached, their silence more unnerving than any sound. Alaric Shaw was waiting for her at the entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the massive oak doors. He was younger than Olivia had expected, his sharp features and piercing grey eyes giving him an air of both intellect and intensity. "Miss Hartley," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to Ashford Manor. I trust the journey was uneventful." Olivia shook his hand, noting the strength of his grip. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw. The countryside is as beautiful as I remember." He smiled faintly. "It has its charms, though I suspect you'll find the manor more intriguing. Shall we?" With that, he pushed open the heavy doors, and Olivia stepped into the grand entry hall. The interior of the manor was as impressive as its exterior, with soaring ceilings, intricate woodwork, and a grand staircase that seemed to stretch into eternity. Yet, despite its grandeur, the house felt cold and hollow, as though it were holding its breath. "You'll find the archives in the East Wing," Alaric said, leading her through the hall. "They're quite extensive, though I'll warn you, much of the material is fragmented. The previous owners were not exactly diligent record keepers." "I'm used to piecing things together," Olivia replied, her eyes scanning the ornate details of the walls and ceiling. And the clock? Alaric paused, his gaze flicking toward the tower visible through a nearby window. The clock is complicated, he said. I'm sure you'll uncover its secrets in time. But be careful, Ms. Hartley. Ashford Manor has a way of keeping its mysteries close. The archives were a historian's dream, a sprawling collection of books, letters, maps, and artifacts that spanned centuries. Olivia spent hours sifting through the material, her excitement growing with each discovery. She found faded blueprints of the manor, letters between its former inhabitants, and journals that hinted at strange occurrences within its walls. Yet, for all the information she uncovered, the clock remained an enigma. Its design was unlike anything she had seen before, and the few mentions of it in the records were vague and cryptic. As the day wore on, Olivia became increasingly aware of the clock's presence. Its steady ticking echoed faintly through the manor, a constant backdrop to her work. It was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder that time was always moving forward, even in a place that seemed frozen in the past. That night, as she prepared to retire to the guest room Alaric had arranged for her, Olivia couldn't resist one last look at the clock tower. She climbed the creaking stairs to the top floor, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The tower loomed before her, its door ajar as though inviting her inside. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the walls. The clock stood at the center, its massive gears and pendulum gleaming in the pale light. Olivia approached it cautiously, her eyes tracing the intricate details of its design. It was a masterpiece of engineering, yet there was something otherworldly about it, as though it were alive. As she reached out to touch the clock, a sudden noise made her freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, a whisper. Olivia turned sharply, her heart pounding as she scanned the room. There was no one there, yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable. She backed away from the clock, her pulse racing as the whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices murmuring just beyond the edge of comprehension. She fled the tower, her mind racing with questions. What was the true nature of the clock? And what secrets did Ashford Manor hold? As she lay in bed that night, the whispers echoed in her mind, mingling with the steady ticking of the clock. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with shadows and the ever-present sound of time slipping away. The following morning, the soft light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of Olivia's guest room, illuminating the high ceilings and ornate molding that framed the space. Despite the grandeur, the room carried a subtle chill that made her shiver as she climbed out of bed. She wrapped herself in a woolen shawl and moved to the window, pulling the curtains aside to take in the view. The rolling hills of Ashford stretched out before her, their lush greenery shrouded in a thin layer of mist. Yet her gaze was drawn inevitably to the clock tower, its silhouette cutting sharply into the morning sky. The events of the previous night lingered in her mind, the whispers and the oppressive sensation of being watched refusing to fade. Olivia had spent hours tossing and turning, her sleep plagued by fragmented dreams of ticking clocks and shadowy figures. Despite her exhaustion, a spark of determination burned within her. The mysteries of Ashford Manor were more than academic, they were personal now. She had to uncover the truth. After a hurried breakfast in the manor's cavernous dining room, Olivia made her way back to the archives. The room was exactly as she had left it the night before, its shelves and tables laden with centuries of history waiting to be unraveled. Alaric Shaw was nowhere to be seen, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the ever-present ticking that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She began her work by organizing the documents she had discovered the day before. Among the collection were letters written by Elizabeth Ashford, the manor's most infamous occupant and the one most closely tied to its legends. Elizabeth had lived in the manor during the late 18th century, a time when whispers of strange occurrences had first begun to spread through the village. Her letters were addressed to a man named Victor Blackwell, whose identity remained a mystery. Olivia's curiosity was piqued as she read through their correspondence, each letter revealing a fragment of a larger, darker narrative. One particular letter caught her attention. The ink had faded over time, but Elizabeth's handwriting was still legible. Dearest Victor, the clock's chime grows louder with each passing day, its voice echoing through my very soul. I fear it is not merely a machine but a sentinel, watching and waiting. The dreams persist, filled with visions of a place beyond comprehension, where time itself unravels. You must come at once, for I cannot face this alone. Yours, in fear and in hope, Elizabeth. Olivia set the letter down, her mind racing. Elizabeth's words hinted at a connection between the clock and something far more profound than mere machinery. What had she meant by a place beyond comprehension? And what role had Victor Blackwell played in her story? As the morning turned to afternoon, Olivia's focus shifted to the architectural blueprints of the manor. She unrolled a large, brittle sheet of parchment that detailed the original design of the house. The clock tower, she noted, had been part of the manor since its construction in 1742, an unusual feature for an estate of its time. The blueprints showed intricate mechanisms within the tower, labeled with cryptic notations in Latin and an unfamiliar script that resembled runes. One section of the blueprints caught her eye, a hidden chamber located beneath the tower, accessible only through a narrow passageway concealed within the library. The discovery sent a thrill through her, and she quickly folded the parchment and tucked it under her arm. If the chamber still existed, it might hold the answers she sought. The library was one of the grandest rooms in the manor, its walls lined with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Dust motes danced in the beams of light streaming through the tall, arched windows, and the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. Olivia searched the shelves and walls methodically, her fingers trailing over the ornate carvings that adorned the woodwork. It wasn't long before she found it, a small, almost imperceptible notch in the paneling near the base of one shelf. She pressed against it, and with a soft click, the section of wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passageway that descended into the shadows. The faint sound of ticking grew louder, as if the clock itself were beckoning her forward. Olivia hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The passage was narrow and damp, the stone walls cool to the touch. The air grew colder as she descended, each step echoing faintly in the confined space. At the bottom of the staircase, she found herself in a small, circular chamber. The room was bare except for a pedestal at its center, upon which rested a clock unlike any she had ever seen. The clock was ornate, its surface covered in intricate engravings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Its hands moved with a precision that defied logic, ticking softly but steadily. Around its base were more of the strange runes she had seen in the blueprints, their meaning as elusive as ever. Olivia felt a strange pull as she approached, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached out to touch the clock, a sudden wave of vertigo washed over her. The room seemed to shift around her, the walls rippling like water. She stumbled back, clutching the edge of the pedestal for support. The ticking grew louder, echoing in her ears until it became deafening. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. Olivia blinked, her vision clearing. The chamber was unchanged, but she felt different, as though something within her had shifted. She turned her attention back to the clock, her fingers brushing against its surface. It was cold, yet it seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The clock, of course, gave no answer. But as Olivia stood there, a faint whisper reached her ears, distinct and deliberate. It was the same sound she had heard in the tower the night before, and it sent a shiver down her spine. When Olivia emerged from the passageway, the afternoon sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the library. Alaric Shaw was waiting for her, his expression unreadable. "You found it," he said, his tone more statement than question. Olivia nodded. "There's a chamber beneath the tower. A clock, unlike anything I've ever seen. It's connected to the manor, isn't it? To everything that's happening here." Alaric's gaze hardened. "You've seen too much, Ms. Hartley. But perhaps that was inevitable. The manor has a way of revealing itself to those it deems worthy." "Worthy of what?" Olivia demanded. "That remains to be seen," he said cryptically. "But know this, the clock is more than a relic. It is a key, and its ticking is the heartbeat of something far greater than this house." That night, Olivia's dreams were darker than ever. She saw the clock tower, its gears turning with a relentless rhythm, and the faces of those who had lived and died within the manor's walls. Their voices merged into a single, haunting whisper that spoke of time and fate, of choices made and paths not taken. She awoke with a start, her heart racing and her mind filled with questions she couldn't yet answer. As she lay in the darkness, the ticking of the clock filled her ears, steady and unyielding. It was a sound that had always been there, a constant presence in the background of her life. But now, she realized, it was more than just a sound. It was a call to action, a challenge she couldn't ignore. Tomorrow, she decided, she would return to the clock tower. Whatever secrets Ashford Manor held, she would uncover them. And whatever the cost, she would face the truth. For in the ever-ticking clock of Ashford Manor, time waited for no one. Olivia awoke with a sense of purpose sharper than any she had felt in years. The morning light filtered through the thick curtains of her guest room, illuminating the dust particles that danced lazily in the air. Yet, beneath the calm exterior of Ashford Manor, she could feel the same unseen force that had haunted her since her arrival. The ticking of the clock tower was ever present, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo in her very bones. After dressing quickly, she made her way to the dining room, where Alaric Shaw was already seated, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, offering a polite nod. "Good morning, Ms. Hartley," he said. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough," Olivia replied, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from him. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about the clock being a key. What exactly does it unlock?" Alaric's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something, hesitation, perhaps, in his eyes. "That," he said slowly, "is a question I've been trying to answer for some time. The clock's mechanisms are unlike anything I've ever seen, and its origins are unconventional. It's as if it exists outside of time itself." "What about Elizabeth Ashford?" Olivia pressed. Her letters suggest she believed the clock was more than just a machine. She described it as a sentinel, watching and waiting. What did she mean by that? Alaric's gaze darkened. Elizabeth was a complicated woman. She was brilliant, yes, but also deeply troubled. Her fascination with the clock consumed her, and some say it drove her mad. But whether her fears were unfounded or prophetic is something only you can decide. Olivia nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She finished her tea in silence, then excused herself to return to the archives. There was still so much to uncover, and she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The archives were as she had left them, a labyrinth of dusty books, fragile manuscripts, and forgotten artifacts. Olivia's focus shifted to a collection of journals written by former stewards of the manor, each detailing their experiences with the clock. The entries were cryptic and fragmented, but one theme remained consistent. The clock was both a marvel and a menace, a force that defied explanation and demanded reverence. One journal, written by a man named Thomas Green in 1836, caught Olivia's attention. The handwriting was erratic, the ink smudged as though written in haste. The clock's voice grows louder with each passing day, its chime reverberating through the very fabric of the manor. "I fear it is not merely a construct of gears and springs, but a conduit, a bridge to something beyond our comprehension. Last night, I dreamed of a void, vast and infinite, where time unraveled like threads of silk. The clock stood at its center, its hands moving with a purpose I could not fathom. I awoke drenched in sweat, the ticking louder than ever before." Olivia read the passage twice, her pulse quickening. A bridge to something beyond comprehension. The phrase mirrored Elizabeth Ashford's description of the clock. What was this void they spoke of? And why did the clock seem to be the key to accessing it? She spent the rest of the morning cross-referencing Green's journal with other accounts, but the more she read, the more questions she uncovered. Each piece of evidence seemed to lead her further into a labyrinth of mystery, its center shrouded in darkness. By afternoon, Olivia felt a growing sense of urgency. She decided to return to the hidden chamber beneath the clock tower, determined to examine the enigmatic clock more closely. Armed with a notebook, a magnifying glass, and a portable recorder, she retraced her steps to the library and the concealed passageway. The narrow staircase seemed steeper this time, the air colder and heavier. When she reached the chamber, the clock's soft ticking filled the space, its rhythm steady and unyielding. Olivia approached the pedestal cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the intricate engravings that covered the clock's surface. She began by sketching the runes that encircled its base, their shapes unlike any language she had encountered before. As she worked, she felt a strange sensation, a faint vibration emanating from the clock, as though it were alive. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over its surface, before pressing the recorder's button. "This is Olivia Hartley," she began, her voice steady despite her unease. "I'm in the hidden chamber beneath the clock tower. The clock is extraordinary. Its design is intricate, almost organic, and it seems to emit a faint energy. The runes around its base are unlike any known script. Could they be?" Her voice trailed off as a sudden noise interrupted her thoughts. It was faint at first, barely audible over the ticking, but it grew steadily louder. A low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the chamber. Olivia turned sharply, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, but the room appeared unchanged. And then she saw it. A faint shimmer in the air, just above the clock. It was barely perceptible, like heat rising from asphalt, but it pulsed with a rhythm that matched the clock's ticking. Olivia's breath caught as she reached out, her hand trembling. The moment her fingers brushed the shimmer, a surge of energy shot through her, and the world around her dissolved. Underscore 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 underscore. She found herself standing in a vast, featureless expanse. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and black, stretching endlessly in all directions. The sky was a swirling mass of colors, shifting and pulsing in time with an invisible rhythm. At the center of this strange realm stood the clock, its gears turning with a deliberate precision. Olivia approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she drew closer, she realized the clock was much larger here, its face towering above her like a monolith. The runes on its surface glowed faintly, their light pulsating in time with its ticking. A voice echoed through the void, deep and resonant. "Olivia Hartley, you have crossed the threshold." She turned, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, its tone both commanding and ominous. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "We are the keepers of the bridge," the voice replied. "The clock is our sentinel, guarding the passage between worlds. You have been chosen to witness its purpose." "Why me?" Olivia asked. "What is this place?" The voice paused, as if considering her questions. "This is the nexus," it said. "A place where time converges and diverges. The clock is the anchor, ensuring the balance is maintained. Without it, the threads of existence would unravel." Olivia's mind raced as she tried to process the enormity of what she was hearing. "And the void? The dreams? What do they mean?" "The void is what lies beyond the bridge," the voice said. "A realm of chaos and infinite possibility. The clock prevents it from encroaching upon your world. But its power is not infinite. The bridge must be guarded, its sentinel maintained." Alaric found her in the library later that evening, her face pale but determined. She recounted what had happened in the tower, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The key is the answer," she concluded. "It can restore the clock's power and preserve the balance. But I need your help to understand how to use it." Alaric's expression was unreadable as he listened, but he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "But know this, Olivia, whatever choice you make, it will have consequences. The clock demands sacrifice, and its toll is never light." Olivia nodded, her resolve unshaken. She had come to Ashford Manor seeking answers, and now she had a purpose. The clock's secrets were no longer a mystery to be unraveled, they were a challenge to be met. And she was ready to face them, no matter the cost. Olivia awoke the next morning with a renewed sense of determination. The key, still tucked safely in the pocket of her coat, seemed to hum faintly with an energy she couldn't ignore. The weight of what she had uncovered pressed heavily on her, but it also fueled her resolve. If the key truly had the power to restore the clock and preserve the balance, then she had no choice but to see this through. The library's archives became her sanctuary once more. Alaric had provided her with access to every resource the manor had to offer, and Olivia intended to use them all. She combed through the journals of past stewards, searching for any mention of the key or its connection to the clock. Each entry she read seemed to hint at its significance, though none offered a clear explanation. One journal, written by a steward named Arthur Wakefield in the late 19th century, caught Olivia's attention. The entries were disjointed, filled with frantic notes and sketches of the clock's mechanisms. One passage, in particular, stood out. The key is more than a tool, it is a conduit. Its purpose is not to repair but to connect, to bridge the gap between the sentinel and the void. The keepers speak of balance, but at what cost? I fear the clock demands more than we can give. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. A conduit. The word suggested that the key's purpose was far more complex than she had initially thought. If it truly connected the clock to the void, then using it might be more dangerous than she had anticipated. But without it, the balance would collapse, and the void would consume everything. The stakes couldn't be higher. As the hours passed, Olivia's frustration grew. The answers she sought remained maddeningly out of reach, buried beneath layers of cryptic language and fragmented records. She decided to take a break and stepped outside into the manor's overgrown gardens. The cool afternoon air was a welcome relief, and the sight of the clock tower rising above the treetops served as a stark reminder of her task. Alaric joined her not long after, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You look troubled," he said, his voice low. "I'm missing something," Olivia admitted. "The key is important, but I don't understand how to use it. And every answer I find only seems to raise more questions." Alaric nodded thoughtfully. "The manor has always been a place of riddles," he said. "But sometimes, the answers we seek are not in the past but in the present. Perhaps the key will reveal its purpose when the time is right." Olivia frowned, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "That's not exactly reassuring, Alaric." He offered a faint smile. "No, I suppose it isn't. But the clock chose you, Olivia. Whatever it requires, you are the one who must face it." That evening, Olivia returned to the clock tower, the key clutched tightly in her hand. The climb up the narrow staircase felt even more arduous than before, the air growing colder with each step. When she reached the top, she paused to catch her breath, her heart pounding as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The clock room was just as she had left it, its massive gears turning with steady precision. The pendulum swung back and forth, its motion hypnotic. Olivia approached the central mechanism, her fingers brushing against the intricate engravings that adorned its surface. She could feel the key's energy pulsing faintly, as though it were resonating with the clock itself. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The room remained silent, but the ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, filling the space with its relentless rhythm. Olivia took a deep breath and inserted the key into a small, circular slot she hadn't noticed before. The moment the key clicked into place, the clock's gears ground to a halt, and the room was plunged into an eerie silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air around her began to ripple, and a faint light emanated from the clock's face. The runes etched into its surface glowed brightly, their patterns shifting and twisting like living things. Olivia stepped back, her pulse racing as the room seemed to dissolve around her. She found herself once again in the nexus, the vast, featureless expanse stretching endlessly in all directions. The clock tower stood at the center, its glow more intense than ever. The voice of the keepers echoed through the void, their tone both commanding and ominous. "The bridge is failing, Olivia Hartley. The balance cannot be maintained without sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" Olivia demanded. "What do you want from me?" "The Sentinel's power must be renewed," the voice replied. "The key will restore the connection, but it requires a piece of the one who wields it. A fragment of your essence, given willingly, to sustain the balance." Olivia's breath caught. "My essence? You mean my soul?" The keepers were silent for a moment before replying. "The choice is yours. Without the Sentinel, the void will consume all. But the price is not without consequence." When Olivia returned to the physical world, the weight of the keeper's words pressed heavily on her. She sat in the clock room for what felt like hours, staring at the glowing runes and the key still embedded in the mechanism. The choice before her was impossible, yet she knew she couldn't walk away. The next morning, she sought out Alaric in his study. He listened intently as she recounted what had happened, his expression grave. "I've heard rumors of such a price," he admitted. "But I never thought it would come to this. The clock's power is immense, but it has always demanded more than we could fully understand. Are you certain you're willing to pay this price?" Olivia hesitated, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "If it's the only way to save the balance, then I don't have a choice." Alaric placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you have my support, whatever happens. But know this, Olivia, once you make this choice, there's no turning back." She nodded, her resolve hardening. The clock had chosen her, and she would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The morning sunlight filtered through the high windows of Ashford Manor, casting long shadows across the floor. Olivia felt the gravity of her decision weighing on her as she made her way to the clock tower once again. The key, now glowing faintly in her pocket, seemed almost to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The whispers of the keepers echoed faintly in her mind, a reminder of the monumental choice she faced. Alaric met her at the base of the tower, his face lined with concern. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "I appreciate that," Olivia replied, "but the clock chose me. Whatever it takes to restore the balance, I'm ready to face it." Alaric nodded, though the doubt in his eyes remained. "Then let's make sure you're prepared," he said. "There are things about the clock, about the nexus, that you need to understand before you proceed." He led her to the study, where he had laid out a series of ancient tomes and manuscripts. Each one bore the marks of time and use, their pages filled with diagrams, symbols, and notes in languages both familiar and alien. "These texts were written by the stewards who came before us," Alaric explained. "Each of them faced the clock's demands, and each paid a price. But they also left behind their knowledge, in the hope that it would guide those who followed." Olivia spent hours poring over the texts, her mind absorbing every detail. She learned of the clock's origins, how it had been built not merely as a timepiece but as a barrier against the void. The keepers, entities that existed beyond the realm of human understanding, had chosen the clock as their sentinel. It was a device of immense power, capable of bridging the gap between worlds, but it required a constant flow of energy to sustain its function. The key, she discovered, was not simply a tool to repair the clock but a vessel for that energy. It drew upon the essence of its wielder, transferring a fragment of their soul into the clock's mechanisms. This sacrifice, though small, was irreversible, binding the wielder to the clock and the balance it maintained. "It's not just a piece of you that the clock takes," Alaric said, his tone grave. "It's a connection, a tether. From that moment on, you become a part of the clock, and it becomes a part of you. The balance it guards will depend on your strength, your will to endure." That evening, Olivia sat alone in her room, the weight of Alaric's words pressing heavily on her. The key rested on the desk before her, its faint glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. She thought of Elizabeth Ashford, of Arthur Wakefield, and the other stewards who had come before her. Each had faced the clock, and each had left their mark on its history. Now, it was her turn. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Alaric entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I thought this might help," he said, placing the box on the desk. Inside was a pendant, its center adorned with a tiny, intricate replica of the clock's face. "It belonged to Elizabeth," Alaric explained. "She wore it during her time as steward. It's said to offer clarity and focus to those who bear the clock's burden." Olivia picked up the pendant, its weight solid in her hand. She fastened it around her neck, the cool metal pressing against her skin. "Thank you," she said softly. The next morning, Olivia climbed the tower for what she knew would be the final time. The air grew colder as she ascended, the sound of the clocks ticking growing louder with each step. When she reached the top, she paused to steady herself before entering the clock room. The room was bathed in a golden light, the gears and pendulum gleaming as they moved in perfect harmony. Olivia approached the central mechanism, the key held tightly in her hand. She inserted it into the slot, the familiar click echoing through the chamber. This time, The reaction was immediate. The clock's gears ground to a halt, and the room was plunged into silence. The air around her shimmered, and she felt the now familiar pull as the nexus began to take shape. The nexus was different this time. The swirling chaos of colors and shapes was more intense, the air charged with energy. The clock tower stood at the center, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. The keepers' voices filled the void, their tone more insistent than before. Olivia Hartley, the time has come. The bridge must be restored. Olivia stepped forward, the key in her hand. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. The runes on the clock's surface flared to life, their patterns shifting and intertwining. The key began to glow, its light merging with that of the clock. Olivia felt a surge of energy as the mechanism came alive, the gears turning with renewed vigor. And then, she felt it. A sharp, searing pain deep within her chest, as though a piece of her very being was being pulled away. She gasped, her vision blurring as the connection took hold. The clock's ticking filled her ears, drowning out all other sound. The sentinel is restored, the keepers intoned. The balance is preserved. But the burden is now yours to bear. When Olivia awoke, she was back in the clock room, the key still embedded in the mechanism. The pain had subsided, replaced by a strange sense of calm. She stood slowly, her hand brushing against the pendant around her neck. The clock's ticking was steady and strong, its rhythm syncing with her own heartbeat. Alaric was waiting for her at the base of the tower. It's done, she said simply. He nodded, his expression one of both relief and admiration. You've done what many could not. The manner, the balance, we owe you everything. Olivia shook her head. This isn't the end, Alaric. The clock will need to be guarded, its burden carried. I'll do my part, but the fight isn't over. As she looked up at the clock tower, its silhouette framed against the evening sky, Olivia felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she had ever known. The sentinel was restored, and the balance preserved, for now. But she knew the void would always linger, waiting for its chance. And she would be ready. The silence that followed the restoration of the clock was unlike any Olivia had ever experienced. It was not the silence of peace, but of anticipation, a pause before the storm. The sentinel had been renewed, its gears humming with restored energy, but Olivia could sense that her journey was far from over. The balance was preserved, yes, but the cost of her sacrifice was only beginning to reveal itself. In the days that followed, the manor seemed to come alive in strange and unsettling ways. The whispers in the walls, once faint and intermittent, grew louder and more insistent. Shadows moved where no light should have been, and the air seemed charged with an otherworldly energy. Olivia felt the clock's presence constantly, its ticking now intertwined with her own heartbeat, a rhythm she could not escape. Alaric was the first to notice the change in her. You're connected to it now, he said one evening as they stood in the grand hall, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. The clock's power flows through you, and it's bound to leave its mark. I can feel it, Olivia admitted. It's like a part of me has been replaced. I'm not sure if I'm still myself. Alaric placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You are, Olivia. The clock may have taken a part of you, but it hasn't defined you. Remember that. But Olivia wasn't sure. The dreams that had haunted her before the restoration returned with greater intensity. Night after night, she found herself standing in the nexus, the void swirling around her as the keepers' voices echoed in her mind. They spoke of the balance, of the sentinel's role, and of the void's insatiable hunger. One night, the dream took a darker turn. The void began to seep into the nexus, tendrils of shadow reaching for the clock tower at its center. The keepers' voices grew frantic, their words fragmented and incomprehensible. Olivia awoke in a cold sweat, the echo of the clock's ticking filling her ears. The next morning, Olivia confronted Alaric in the study. The void is growing stronger, she said, pacing the room. The keepers warned me in my dreams. The balance is failing again, and it's happening faster than I expected. Alaric frowned, his expression grim. The clock should have stabilized the balance, he said. Unless, he trailed off, his eyes narrowing as he considered the possibility. Unless what? Olivia pressed. Unless the clock's power alone isn't enough, Alaric replied. The key may have restored the sentinel, but if the void's influence has grown too strong, the balance could still collapse. There may be something, or someone, amplifying its reach. The silence that followed the restoration of the clock was unlike any Olivia had ever experienced. It was not the silence of peace, but of anticipation, a pause before the storm. The sentinel had been renewed, its gears humming with restored energy, but Olivia could sense that her journey was far from over. The balance was preserved, yes, but the cost of her sacrifice was only beginning to reveal itself. In the days that followed, the manor seemed to come alive in strange and unsettling ways. The whispers in the walls, once faint and intermittent, grew louder and more insistent. Shadows moved where no light should have been, and the air seemed charged with an otherworldly energy. Olivia felt the clock's presence constantly, its ticking now intertwined with her own heartbeat, a rhythm she could not escape. Alaric was the first to notice the change in her. "You're connected to it now," he said one evening as they stood in the grand hall, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. "The clock's power flows through you, and it's bound to leave its mark." "I can feel it," Olivia admitted. "It's like a part of me has been replaced. I'm not sure if I'm still myself." Alaric placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are, Olivia. The clock may have taken a part of you, but it hasn't defined you. Remember that." But Olivia wasn't sure. The dreams that had haunted her before the restoration returned with greater intensity. Night after night, she found herself standing in the nexus, the void swirling around her as the keeper's voices echoed in her mind. They spoke of the balance, of the sentinel's role, and of the void's insatiable hunger. One night, the dream took a darker turn. The void began to seep into the nexus, tendrils of shadow reaching for the clock tower at its center. The keeper's voices grew frantic, their words fragmented and incomprehensible. Olivia awoke in a cold sweat, the echo of the clock's ticking filling her ears. The next morning, Olivia confronted Alaric in the study. "The void is growing stronger," she said, pacing the room. "The keepers warned me in my dreams. The balance is failing again, and it's happening faster than I expected." Alaric frowned, his expression grim. "The clock should have stabilized the balance," he said. "Unless," he trailed off, his eyes narrowing as he considered the possibility. "Unless what?" Olivia pressed. "Unless the clock's power alone isn't enough," Alaric replied. "The key may have restored the sentinel, but if the void's influence has grown too strong, the balance could still collapse. There may be something, or someone, amplifying its reach." Olivia's mind raced. "If that's true, then we need to find the source and stop it. Do you have any idea where to start?" Alaric hesitated before gesturing to the tomes and manuscripts spread across the study. "The answers might be in these," he said. "The stewards who came before us faced similar crises. Perhaps their writings hold a clue." The two of them spent hours poring over the texts, their combined efforts driven by urgency. They found accounts of past stewards who had confronted the void's incursions, each describing a different approach to restoring the balance. Some spoke of rituals performed in the nexus, while others mentioned artifacts imbued with protective power. But one account, written by a steward named Helena Graves in the early 18th century, stood out. Helena's journal described a shadow that had taken root within the manor itself, a manifestation of the void's influence that grew stronger as the balance weakened. She referred to it as the harbinger, a presence that fed on fear and doubt, sowing chaos in its wake. To banish it, she had performed a ritual that required not just the clock's power but her own connection to the sentinel. "The harbinger," Olivia murmured, the name sending a chill down her spine. "Do you think it could still be here?" Alaric's jaw tightened. "It's possible. If the void's influence has returned, the harbinger might have as well. And if it's feeding on the manor's energy, it could explain why the balance is failing so quickly. Then we have to stop it," Olivia said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Underscore 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 underscore. Their search for the harbinger began that evening. Olivia and Alaric combed through the manor, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they explored every corner of the sprawling estate. The whispers that had haunted Olivia since her arrival grew louder, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and anger. Shadows moved in the periphery of her vision, their shapes shifting and writhing like living things. In the library, Olivia felt a sudden chill. The air grew heavy, and the whispers coalesced into a single voice, low and guttural. "You cannot stop it," the voice hissed. "The void will consume all." She turned sharply, her flashlight beam revealing nothing but empty shelves and dust-covered books. But the presence remained, oppressive and unrelenting. She gripped the pendant around her neck, its cool weight grounding her as she forced herself to move forward. "It's here," she called out to Alaric, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I can feel it." He appeared at her side moments later, his own flashlight cutting through the gloom. "Then we need to draw it out," he said. Helena's journal mentioned that the harbinger feeds on the sentinel's energy. "If we can lure it to the clock tower, we might be able to trap it there." Olivia nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it." The plan was simple but dangerous. Olivia would use her connection to the clock to channel its energy, drawing the harbinger to the tower. Once it was contained, Alaric would activate a ritual using the pendant and the key to banish the entity back to the void. The risk was immense, but it was their only chance to save the manor and the balance. As they prepared for the confrontation, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows seemed to press closer, the whispers growing louder and more frantic. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. When they reached the clock tower, the air was thick with tension. Olivia climbed the stairs alone, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The clock room was bathed in a faint, eerie glow, the gears turning with deliberate precision. She stood before the central mechanism, the key and pendant in hand, and began to focus. The connection was immediate. She felt the clock's energy surge through her, its power mingling with her own. The air around her shimmered, and the shadows began to coalesce into a single, towering figure. The harbinger. It was a mass of darkness and light, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly glow, and its voice echoed in her mind. "You cannot contain me," it hissed. "The void is inevitable." But Olivia stood her ground, the clock's power bolstering her resolve. "You won't take this place," she said, her voice ringing out clearly. "Not while I'm here." The harbinger lunged, and the battle for the manor's soul began. The harbinger surged forward, a swirling mass of shadows and light that filled the clock room with an oppressive presence. Olivia stood her ground, the clock's energy coursing through her as she clutched the pendant tightly. The sentinel's ticking echoed in her ears, steady and unyielding, a reminder of the balance she was fighting to preserve. "You will not take this place," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "The void ends here." The harbinger's form shifted, its burning eyes narrowing as it regarded her. "You are but a fragment," it hissed, its voice resonating like 1,000 whispers layered upon one another. "You cannot withstand the void's will." Olivia felt a flicker of doubt, but she pushed it aside. She had come too far to falter now. Drawing on the connection she had forged with the clock, she focused her energy, channeling its power into the room. The runes etched into the clock's surface began to glow, their light growing brighter as the mechanism's gears turned with renewed vigor. The harbinger recoiled, its form flickering as the light intensified. "You cannot hold me back forever," it snarled. "The void is inevitable. You will fall, as all before you have fallen." "Maybe," Olivia said, her voice firm. "But not today." Below, Alaric worked frantically to prepare the ritual. The pendant Olivia wore was the key to completing the banishment, its intricate design a conduit for the sentinel's power. He arranged the artifacts in a precise circle, the runes carved into their surfaces glowing faintly as he chanted the ancient incantation Helena's journal had described. The ground beneath the manor trembled, the air thick with tension as the battle in the clock tower raged on. Shadows flickered at the edges of Alaric's vision, the whispers growing louder with each passing moment. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. Olivia was holding the harbinger at bay, but she couldn't do it alone. Almost there, he muttered, his voice drowned out by the cacophony around him. Just a little longer. In the tower, the harbinger lashed out, its tendrils of shadow striking at Olivia with relentless force. She dodged and countered, her connection to the clock allowing her to deflect the attacks. But each strike drained her strength, and she could feel the void's pull growing stronger with every passing moment. The sentinel's light flared, pushing the harbinger back, but the entity's resolve did not waver. You cannot maintain this forever, it taunted. Your strength will fail, and the void will consume all. You're wrong, Olivia shot back. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever fought to keep the balance. I'm not alone in this. As if in response, the pendant around her neck began to glow, its light merging with that of the sentinel. Olivia felt a surge of energy, the combined power of the clock and the pendant coursing through her. She raised her hand, the light radiating from her palm as she faced the harbinger. This ends now, she said, her voice echoing with authority. The light struck the harbinger, its form writhing as it let out a deafening roar. The shadows dissipated, the entity's presence retreating as the void's influence was pushed back. Olivia held her ground, her focus unwavering as she channeled every ounce of strength into the banishment. At that moment, Alaric completed the ritual. The runes flared brightly, their light spreading throughout the manor. The ground stilled, the whispers fading into silence as the banishment took hold. A wave of energy swept through the clock tower, enveloping Olivia and the sentinel in its glow. The harbinger let out one final, anguished cry before it was consumed by the light. Its form dissolved, the void's presence vanishing as the balance was restored. The sentinel's ticking resumed, steady and strong, a testament to the battle that had been won. When the light faded, Olivia collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was still, the oppressive energy that had filled it now replaced by a profound calm. She looked up at the clock, its gears turning smoothly, the runes on its surface glowing faintly. Alaric appeared moments later, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he said, helping her to her feet. "You did it." "We did it," Olivia corrected, her voice weak but resolute. "The harbinger is gone, and the balance is safe, for now." Alaric nodded, his gaze shifting to the clock. "The sentinel's power is restored, but the void will always be a threat. You've done more than anyone could have asked, Olivia, but this fight is never truly over." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The clock had claimed a part of her, binding her to its purpose, but it had also given her a sense of clarity and purpose she had never known. She was a steward now, a guardian of the balance, and she would carry that responsibility for the rest of her days. In the days that followed, the manor began to return to its former state. The oppressive energy that had lingered within its walls dissipated, replaced by a sense of peace. The whispers were gone, and the shadows no longer moved of their own accord. The sentinel stood as a beacon of stability, its ticking a reminder of the battle that had been fought and won. Olivia remained at Ashford Manor, dedicating herself to its stewardship. She continued to study the texts left behind by past stewards, determined to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. Alaric stayed by her side, offering his support and guidance as they worked to preserve the balance. As she stood before the clock one evening, the pendant warm against her skin, Olivia felt a sense of quiet determination. The void would always linger, waiting for its chance, but she was ready. The sentinel's light would never falter, not as long as she stood as its guardian. And so, the ever-ticking clock of Ashford Manor continued its relentless rhythm, a testament to the strength of those who fought to keep the balance. For as long as it stood, there was hope. The weeks that followed the harbinger's banishment were a strange mixture of relief and resolve. Ashford Manor, once cloaked in shadows and whispers, now exuded a quiet peace. Yet Olivia knew that the serenity was fleeting. The sentinel's ticking, though steady and strong, served as a constant reminder of the void's persistent threat. She had won a battle, not the war. Each morning, Olivia awoke with the hum of the clock resonating in her chest. It was a sensation she was slowly becoming accustomed to, though it still felt foreign. The connection she had forged with the sentinel was unbreakable, a bond that transcended physicality. She could feel its presence, its power, and its burden. Alaric Shaw remained a steadfast ally, his role as guide and confidant becoming more integral with each passing day. Together, they worked to strengthen the manor's defenses, reinforcing the sigils that lined its walls and studying the texts left by past stewards. The library became their sanctuary, its shelves a treasure trove of knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. The Harbinger was just one aspect of the Void's influence, Alaric said one evening as they pored over Helena Graves' journal. There may be others entities that manifest in different forms, each seeking to destabilize the balance. Olivia nodded, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of a map spread across the table. It depicted the manor's grounds, with markings indicating sites of significance. The clock tower was the most prominent, its position at the center of the diagram symbolizing its role as the sentinel's anchor. If the Void finds another foothold, she said, we need to be ready. The sentinel can't do this alone, and neither can I. Alaric met her gaze, his expression resolute. You won't have to. This manor has always relied on those willing to stand against the darkness. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Underscore 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 underscore. As the days turned into months, Olivia began to notice subtle changes within herself. Her connection to the sentinel had deepened, granting her an acute awareness of the balance it maintained. She could sense fluctuations in the energy that flowed through the manor, subtle shifts that indicated the Void's attempts to encroach upon their world. The pendant around her neck became a source of comfort, its warmth a constant reminder of her purpose. She often found herself standing before the clock, its rhythmic ticking a grounding force amid the uncertainties she faced. It was more than a machine now. It was a living entity, its essence intertwined with her own. One evening, as Olivia stood in the clock tower's chamber, she felt a familiar presence. The air grew still, and the faint shimmer of the nexus appeared before her. The keepers' voices echoed in her mind, their tone neither threatening nor comforting. Olivia Hartley, they intoned. You have restored the sentinel and preserved the balance. But the Void's hunger is eternal. Its shadows will seek new paths, and the bridge must remain strong. I understand, Olivia replied, her voice steady. What must I do? Remain vigilant, the keepers said. The sentinel's power flows through you, but it is not infinite. The balance depends on your strength, your choices, and your will to endure. Remember, the Void thrives on fear and doubt. Stand firm, and it will falter. The nexus faded, leaving Olivia alone in the chamber. She took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. The task before her was daunting, but she had faced worse and emerged stronger. She would not falter. Life at the manor settled into a rhythm that mirrored the sentinel's ticking. Olivia and Alaric continued their work, uncovering new layers of the manor's history and the secrets it held. They discovered references to other sentinels scattered across the world, each guarding its own bridge to the Void. It was a revelation that both intrigued and unsettled them, a reminder that their fight was part of a larger struggle. If there are other sentinels, Olivia mused one afternoon, then there are other stewards. We're not alone in this. Alaric nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. Perhaps one day, we'll find a way to connect with them. For now, we focus on Ashford Manor. Their days were filled with research, repairs, and quiet moments of reflection. The villagers, once wary of the manor, began to see it in a new light. Though they still spoke of it in hushed tones, there was an undercurrent of respect and gratitude. The whispers of the Void had ceased, and the shadows no longer moved of their own accord. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, Olivia found herself in the library, poring over a collection of letters written by Elizabeth Ashford. One passage struck a chord with her. The sentinel is both a guardian and a burden. Its light keeps the darkness at bay, but it also demands a part of the soul. To be its steward is to walk a path of sacrifice, but it is a path worth walking. For without the sentinel, there is only the Void. Olivia set the letter down, her thoughts drifting to the stewards who had come before her. Each had faced their own trials, their own sacrifices, and yet they had persevered. She felt a deep sense of connection to them, a shared purpose that transcended time. As the storm raged outside, she made her way to the clock tower. The chamber was warm, the sentinel's light casting a golden glow that illuminated the gears and pendulum. Olivia placed a hand on the clock's surface, feeling its steady rhythm beneath her fingers. "We'll keep this balance," she whispered, her voice firm. "No matter what comes next." The years passed, and Ashford Manor continued to stand as a beacon of stability. Olivia's connection to the sentinel deepened, her understanding of its power and purpose growing with each passing day. Alaric remained by her side, a constant presence in a world that often felt uncertain. Though the void's influence never disappeared entirely, Olivia learned to recognize its signs and counter its advances. The battles were not always easy, but they were always worth fighting. The sentinel's light never faltered, its ticking a reminder of the balance that had been preserved. And so, the ever-ticking clock of Ashford Manor continued its relentless rhythm, a testament to the strength of those who dared to stand against the void. For as long as it stood, there was hope, and as long as there was hope, the balance would endure.